The challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of faith. Nearly 60 years later, during these challenging times, we'll take a new look at our divisions, our connections, in a new program called Challenge 2.0. To be homeless is far more than to simply be without shelter. It also means increased vulnerability to assault and to lack even the simple resource of an address to maintain social connections and to aid in searching for work. An average of almost 2 out of every 1,000 people in the United States are homeless. Yet that average is much higher for one group that originally called our country home, Native Americans. That problem and solutions that are gaining national attention will be the focus of this edition of Challenge 2.0, Shelterless in Seattle. So we're very grateful to have 3 guests who have very generously offered their time up and who have some wonderful perspectives to share on this issue. I'd like to just take a moment to introduce them. First, Donalda Lyons, who serves as site manager of the new Eagle Village facility developed by the Chief Seattle Club. Donalda, thank you very much for joining us. Jennifer Bearskin is a board member of Urban Indians Northwest and has served as a consultant on Native issues at both the local and the state level. Thank you for joining us. And Colleen Echohawk is the executive director of the Chief Seattle Club in Seattle and has led an innovative program called Eagle Village, and we're going to be hearing much more about that. Thank you, too, very much, Colleen. Let's begin by asking each of you, what was your first encounter with the homelessness problem, and how did its impact on you motivate your involvement in this? Whoever would like to start with that.
When I first found out about the homeless problem is when I actually started working at Chief Seattle back in 2018. I started as Derek's assistant and as a part-time position, and then I didn't realize that the problem, because I'm originally from Arizona, so the problem is not how I see it was here in Seattle, and then I realized that there was just so many of our brothers and sisters like in front of the club, and I really wanted to figure out how much more can I get involved, you know, because I was just at assistant level, you know, part-time, and then the family case manager came involved, and so I was like, oh, okay, you know, this is my way to really be able to get involved in helping find a solution for those that are out on the street.
So my first experience being homeless was when I was 9 years old. Our families had chronic homelessness and poverty throughout my years. It wasn't until I became a mother myself and my son was facing homelessness that I was able to work with the YWCA Pathways for Women, being a domestic violence survivor, because that really impacted my ability to have stable housing. Also with just the issues that we're dealing with, rising rents, and I was working with all of the state agencies at that time, but it was still not enough for me to maintain stable housing. And so I went through the YWCA program and I received my voucher, and that has allowed us to be stable for the last 5 years, which is crucial because my son has autism, and if they don't have stable structure, type of household and daily routine, it can really impact him physically. It was while I was doing the YWCA that they introduced me to the program Resident Action Project. So that is a program that helps us train to be advocates for ourselves and really pulling people with lived experiences to go ahead and tell and share our stories, but also we are able to turn around and be able to mentor and empower others who were in the same position. So I've been doing that work with the Resident Action Project for the last 5 years, and then working on the Indigenous community side for the last 3, specifically trying to identify policies that have been made specifically to suppress us or to oppress us.
And we're going to talk more about that and those issues. Colleen, what about your experience with this?
You know, it's a really great question. I think for the Native American population, we have a really long history around homelessness in our communities because we were removed from our original homelands and pushed into other places. Out here in the Northwest, a lot of our tribes are actually still on their homelands, but for my tribe, the Pawnee Nation, we were moved from Kansas and Nebraska to Oklahoma, and that was our first instance of homelessness. But throughout my lifetime, even as a child, we had people that lived with us that my parents brought into our house who were our relatives or sometimes distant relatives because they were experiencing homelessness. And so many Native communities and families, that is just part of life because of the high rates of poverty. There is just this acknowledgement that if someone is out there, we're going to bring them into our house. And so that's what I got to experience growing up, and it really laid the foundation for the work that we do now at the Chief Seattle Club. We know that in the King County and in Seattle, Native people are 10 times more likely to be homeless than anyone else in this area. And so that is something we have to respond to. That is something that I believe is a moral outrage, that on Coast Salish land, Native people are more likely to be homeless. And so that is my work that I get to do. It's some of the best work I've ever experienced, and we're bringing people inside and into housing.
I'd like to examine a little bit more detail what you mentioned, and that is, number one, the extent of Native populations within the greater Seattle area, and given that percentage, how that compares to the impact of homelessness.
So we know that from the 2010 census, we all were kind of surprised and excited to see that there were a lot of Native people who live in urban centers. In fact, around 70% of Native people around the country live in urban centers. If you look at King County, Native people make up about 1%, a little less than 1% of the total population. But within the homeless population here in King County, we make up to over 10%. So that is a crazy disparity. That speaks exactly to what Jennifer was talking about with the systemic racist policies that have ensured that our people are in this situation. So the work we do at the Chief Seattle Club is a direct reaction to those racist policies. We are working with an anti-racist lens and culturally specific services that speak to the needs of our relatives who've been experiencing homelessness.
When you talk about those policies, and I'd like each of you to share that a little bit more, what issues and what experiences are responsible for this developing to the extent that it has? And I understand also that Native populations that find themselves homeless for whatever reason are much less likely to seek the established shelters. So maybe we could take a look at all of those. But why don't we begin by those policies and experiences that have led to this problem then?
Prior to 1492, nobody was homeless. So we're looking at what has colonization done to cause us to pull away from Mother Earth. So trying to break our bond and our connection to Mother Earth and our community. Climate change has a huge impact because in our teachings we know one impacts the other. So when you're dealing with the way that we lived prior to colonization, we were able to sustain ourselves on the earth as it was. And then when it came time that we had our people pulled into boarding schools and many stripped and separated from their families, like my family specifically, World War II happened and the Japanese attacked my grandmother's island, and that caused the U.S. government to push us to evacuate everybody from there. The Aleutian story is very unknown to many, but we've had to survive Russian genocide, Japanese forced genocide, and then ultimately the U.S. government genocide. And that trauma that my grandmother experienced, you know, she's almost 90. Still, she feels it so hard in her heart now. A couple of her brothers came down this way, and her brother Matthew, he's older than her. He had spent over 50 years homeless on the streets of Seattle. And there was, you know, growing up, you lose your sense of community. I grew in the urban areas and in the cities where I didn't see other people who looked like me. I always felt very isolated and removed from my culture. I lost my language. So when we talk about Indigenous homelessness, it encases everything. The homelessness part is is the affect of First People nations being displaced, and even when it comes to being that we have, the government controls all of our assets, and that's what people don't understand. So many people can take out an equity loan against their house, but any person who's on the reservation, or like say if I went back to my grandmother's land, I wouldn't be able to pull a loan of equity out like many. So there's just all of these specific laws that were created back when, when we had to sign the treaties, when our ancestors had to sign the treaties, that were set up to divide us, to cause us to fight amongst each other, but also to pull away any sense of resources, culture, language, and honestly, when you don't have your language and your culture, you have an empty void in your hachusara, in your soul. And so I've been trying to identify what specific laws that are impacting us now and what type of laws need to be created so that we can level out this field here, because being the first people of this land, we should not be homeless. The governments are not doing their job. And as people that have to be controlled by the government, that says a lot if we are the highest homeless, the highest, who've got the highest suicide rates, we have the highest violence and murder against us, because it wasn't that long ago when they said a good Indian is a dead Indian. And that's not that long ago that this happened within my grandmother's time. And I think it's crucial that that we come together as all communities, because we all have to live here now. Even though we were first people, our ways were never to push anybody away. We make relatives. We don't. We help uplift each other. But it's also important that the other people in our communities recognize what we're battling, because many of it has been silent for many years.
I think that one thing that we're really learning at the Chief Seattle Club and Eagle Village, and also the Coalition to End Urban Indigenous Homelessness, is that we really want to take the leadership in housing and homelessness policies, both for Native people and non-Native people. I think that there is a lot of opportunity for us to grow and to express new ways of leadership around homelessness and housing. One thing we know that is very clear in the data is that Native people are some of the most likely to not go into shelter. So when we look at that, and we look at that information, we think about what Jennifer has just shared so brilliantly, we have no reason as Native people to trust other government systems to house us. So it's very important for us to take the reins back, to show our leadership, and to build our own housing, and to create projects like Eagle Village. So with our Eagle Village project, which houses around anywhere from 30 to 33 to 34 people, and then our new project that opens in August of 2021, that'll be an additional 80 units of housing, will house around 100 people. We will have decreased Native homelessness by 10%. And that's within a 2-year time period. And so we like to share that data with our partners, because the Native solution is an effective solution. It'll help the entire system. And so we're very excited to continue to share these outcomes, and continue to share that when we as Native people are building the housing and leading the housing, then we will have really great outcomes, and it will also just be a beautiful place for our community to come together. So we're excited about the future and feel like we're going to make a pretty big impact.
Walk us back, if you will, when you first started talking about the concept of Eagle Village. What was the inspiration of that? What obstacles did you face, and what assistance did you get for that?
Well, I became the executive director at Chief Seattle Club about 6 years ago, and probably a year into it, I started looking at some of the encampments and thinking, and knowing, we knew we had a lot of our folks. Around 1,100 Native people are homeless every night, and about half of those people are not going into shelter anywhere. So that's around 500 to 600 people. I knew that they were hanging out in these encampments, and we were trying to understand like what we could do to help support those folks. They're very creative, very resilient, and we thought, well, if they're out there, then what can we do? So we talked to a lot of people at the city level, the county level, and said, if there is an opportunity, we want to find a way to build our own place for them. And so we started those conversations years ago, and about a year and a half or 2 years ago now, King County came to us and said, listen, we have these modular units. We know that you have a really excellent rate in housing your people through your rapid rehousing program. So let's think about what this could look like. And so we started that conversation. We looked at some of the units that were available. They're modular units, like trailers, like we like to describe them so people can understand them, and thought, wow, these could just be excellent. So that's how it came together. And we're really grateful for King County for thinking of us and really taking this step of partnership with us.
And you had to take a giant leap
Yes,
in terms
we
of
did.
taking this project on.
Yes, we did.
Give us, Donelda, as the site manager, maybe give us a little bit of a verbal tour of, how these are set up and what they look like.
So they're like a dorm style is the best way you can put it, as a dorm style. And then pending if it's a double unit or a single unit, 1 or 2 beds is in there. And then they have their own personal shower, own personal little restroom. The restroom is probably as big as this area, but they get a little stand-up shower, a toilet, and then they have a little sink in there. So it's a very small, like a dorm, anything you would see in a dorm. And then each unit is designed differently because as people moved in, we told them, make it your space. So some units have, that are female in there, is very floral, others who are bachelor style, they don't got
Not so
nothing
floral,
in there. We have a couple of single men who are there, and in their units, it's just the basics. And then one of the guys has like a little weight area set up where he lifts weights. So, each unit and the inside, the design, the structure is all the same. It's all laid out the same. However, the design of the actual unit and the inside is their own. They made it their own, Those who have couples, pictures of them and their loved ones up on the walls, So the insides are very different, but it's designs, each preference.
Share with us, if you will, and you have, I think you said 30-some people residing there. Share with us a bit, if you would, your experience with some of these people from where they're at when they come in the first time, and then how you see them change or become transformed by living in community and living in a facility like that.
I know of this particular couple. He deals with DLC, and they were, Department of Corrections, yes, and completely intoxicated every time I would see him and his partner, his wife, at the club. And when I did their actual intake, the day they moved in, they were intoxicated. But, I knew they need, I was like, let's just go through with the intake. They were still coherent, took them to their room. And then from that point to this point, they're like, oh, we're going to stop drinking. They told us that, weekend, oh, we're going to stop drinking. And then they said, oh, you know what, we're not drinking vodka no more. We're just drinking beer, And so we're like, okay, But when you see them walking, walk from their trailer, their unit to come to the community building, just the smile in their faces, both of them, And then eventually they both just kind of quit, From time to time, she might have a beer because she's having a struggle with it. But for the most part, they're done drinking. He's like, I need to get my DLC stuff taken care of, And he's like, I can do what I need to do to provide for my family because I know we're safe, And so just the transformation of them, just seeing them coming, they're nice and clean, they're smiling all the time, You just see them smiling all the time and you think, God, do you guys ever fight, But they're just so happy and so grateful from that moment they first did that to where they're at now. And then we have another elderly lady. When she first came in, she came from a different shelter, and she just sat in her chair like this. And, her caseworkers there, sat down with myself and our case manager, Lua, and we kind of had a conversation because she needs special attention, and she was very closed off. She wouldn't look at us, just very, has a lot of going on in her life. And so the first day she moved in, she was just sat like this. And then we showed her her room, and she's like, oh, okay. We unloaded her stuff, and we didn't hear from her for like almost a whole day. And I was like, hey, did anybody hear from so-and-so? And so we go and check on, I go and knock on her door, and she comes out, she's scratching her hair. She's like, hey, she goes, what time is it? And I said, oh, it's 11. And she goes, in the morning? And I said, no, at night. I said, no, the next day. She's like, well, I was just tired. I haven't slept so good. I said, okay, well, come, come. And her just opening up, saying hi to people. She didn't feel accepted. She didn't feel welcome. And she just like, oh, for Valentine's, we made hearts. And so she made a whole bunch of hearts for people to give them out, Oh, I'm going to give this person a heart. I'm going to give that person a heart. And she just fully blossomed into just a very chatty person now. She comes into the community space, which is also our workspace, but she'll make her rounds and say hi to Matt, hi to Lua, hi to me. And as we're in the middle of something and her mental status is not 100, so she struggles with that, but yet, we're like, oh, hey, we acknowledge her, and she goes about her business, and then she comes back, and she's very giving. And that's the one thing, when I seen her at the club, I didn't know that about her. She looked very closed off at the club. She was just looked mad all the time. And she told us, she didn't feel welcomed anywhere, she was in the shelter, a different type of shelter where she had to leave. She couldn't stay there, but now she's in her space and she buys us little gifts, and we keep telling her, no, or she wants to buy coloring books, she just wants to buy stuff for the community, to utilize. And we're like, no, she said, did you know I never had no money and I want to share, and she just, when you see her walking around and she comes, and I know when she sees Colleen or Derek come by, she gets all excited, and, she's free to walk down the street. She comes and tells us, hey, I'm going to go here. Okay, be careful. And then I'm back. She's just, you can just see it in her face, her smile and her walk,
We're seeing incredible transformation. We're seeing people who are finding the stability, who are being able to rest. Like, I love that story that Donalda tells about her sleeping so long. What I think people don't understand is that being homeless takes a lot of work. Yeah. You're trying to manage all your different appointments, trying to get into housing, trying to get into shelter at the right time. It's a lot of work, and then also your trauma is just so intense. And we know we have so many folks who would choose to sleep outside rather than inside in a shelter if there is shelter bed available, and that on its own is incredibly traumatic because you're constantly on guard. You can't totally rest. You can't. You're dealing with all the different dynamics of being outdoors, and so I love hearing that story and hearing about her just coming inside. And we've heard it with several other of our residents at Eagle Village too, that ability just to rest and to sleep, and then to go to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom. True. That is an incredible need. And I also just really appreciate Donalda sharing about some of the issues that people have had with drugs and alcohol. One of the things that we know about housing, our folks who've been experiencing homelessness, is the principle of housing first, is to get people into that housing and then address the issues of mental health, address the issues, any addiction issues. And that has been really incredible for us to see, that when we bring people into housing, they're able to get stable, they're able to reduce their drinking or their other usages, and their mental health also is just completely changed. So we are in love with Eagle Village and in love with those residents out there, and believe that what's happening at Eagle Village is going to be life-changing for many of those folks out there.
Jennifer, I want to ask you, I've heard both of you talk, Donalda and Colleen, about the importance of this developing community. How do you see that in your experience and the work that you do in terms of that provision of a sense of community?
I know that I understand, I get that feeling of what it feels like to finally rest. I finally have nearly unpacked all of my boxes, because I'm used to have just kept things packed, get in a storage unit and get on going because we were unstable. But the coming together as a community is really at the core of our values and our teachings and our beliefs, because we believe that nobody can do anything by themselves. Every person has their own special gift and their talent, because if we all had the same talent, we wouldn't need each other. And that's what's crucial. And I think what's really great with this Eagle Village is that this gives those people a sense of purpose. It gives us a sense of belonging. And that is huge when it comes to your self-esteem and your confidence. I grew up believing that, I wasn't worth society's merit or anything. I understood at a young age that my society, my community had failed me. And that was hard to grow up fast at a young age. But it impacts so many of our Indigenous people, and it follows through generations. And so being able to come back and build that community means we're not only going to change these folks today, but any of the future generations that are going to come. I know within the Urban Indians Northwest, our overall our dream is to build a longhouse, and in a similar way of creating and building community. And I just raise my hands to you both for doing what you do, because that means we show that we care about our people and where they're going and their health and their happiness.
It occurs to me as I've listened to each of you share your experiences, the experiences of people that you work with, and the success you're already seeing, what can non-Native groups that are wrestling with the issue of homelessness, the government, other groups, what do you think they can learn or should learn from what you're achieving?
I think that you can learn about resilience, and you can learn about strength. I think that this time in our country can feel a little dark, and it can feel a little hard. And I think that what I say to people is like, our people have gone through that. They understand what it's like to go through hard times and through difficult times in our country. And we have a lot to show you about what resilience means, about staying focused on a goal. My people, we experienced tremendous hardships. My ancestors would never, their wildest dreams, like did all the shirt, would be that I'm getting to sit here and talk to you. And so they have showed me through their resilience, through their strength, about what it means to stay focused on a goal, to stay focused on serving and loving our community. And I think that's what we have to share with the larger community.
I think that's a very good place to end for now, but I'm going to ask each of you to come back and visit with us again on this. I thank each of you, and I thank you for joining us on this edition of Challenge 2.0. Join us again next week.